responses to climate change. What the hell are we doing about it? Well, some frustrating moments in this, I can almost guarantee you, but some good bits of news as well to cheer us back up a little bit as well. Okay, first things first. These just give you an idea of what it is that you actually need to know for the exam. Really important that you know about the difference between mitigation and adaptation, and then you need examples, mostly for mitigation, but a couple of name drops really for adaptation would be nice as well. Geoengineering is what I will finish on, and I only tell you about that partly because I think some of you will be interested, but I also have a bit of a plea to make, which I will tell you about at the time. Okay? Mitigation, adaptation. If you are trying to mitigate something, you're trying to reduce its impact. So you can mitigate a volcanic hazard because you can try and make sure that when that volcano erupts, you are going to reduce the number of deaths and the amount of damage that that volcano does. So mitigating is about reducing and trying to make something better. Adaptation is learning to live with something. You know it's going to happen, you just have to learn to live with it. And what your exam board is really keen on you appreciating is that for climate change, it is no longer a choice. It would have been a choice if we'd have got our act together a little bit earlier and we had reduced fossil fuel emissions and we could have kind of, turned things around. There is a certain amount of climate change that we have already put into action. So it's not a choice, it's both. We're going to have to mitigate and we are going to have to adapt. And there's just a few kind of little examples. Some of them do sort of slightly overlap, but that is the important difference for you to understand. Okay, action to reduce emissions that cause climate change, mitigation, action to manage the risks of climate change impacts, adaptation. My simple English: mitigate, try and reduce the greenhouse effect, or I should say the anthropogenic greenhouse effect, and adaptation is learning to live with. Right, so we're going to start with mitigating, and you do need to know the 3 levels. You need to know what we're doing as a planet, what countries are doing, and what you can do at a local level. It's really important, please, to make sure that you cover those 3 scales. Okay, so this you don't need to write down or learn. I'm just giving you some context. I have heard and I have seen people saying, well, the trouble of climate change is we haven't known about it for very long. So the reason that we haven't done very much about it is because we didn't know. And it's like, I don't think you can use that as an excuse, actually. We have known about it for quite a long time. And ironically, bearing in mind the recent, what word do I need to use? Not sure. The recent reluctance, shall we say, of the United States to do anything about climate change. It was actually Richard Nixon who encouraged NATO to actually find out more about it. Anyway, we've known about it for a long time. That is not an excuse. Okay. And our first meeting, I should just show you, it was in 1997 in Kyoto in Japan. So all of the climate change meetings, they're just named after the place that the meeting was held. So Paris conference, guess what was in Paris? Kyoto, because it's a place that not many people have heard of, they think it's some weird code name. It's just a place in Japan. All right, so Kyoto is just a place in Japan where they had the first agreement. And what I would say, and I'll justify this to you in a minute, I would say that the Kyoto Agreement was partially successful, particularly with the benefit of hindsight, which you possibly don't have yet, but I do. It probably is better than anything that has come since. So, I'm not going to tell you everything about it, I'm going to tell you the key messages. Kyoto was an agreement to reduce greenhouse gases. Okay, it was a form of mitigation, and that was the agreement. However, it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect, but the blue countries. So as you can see, the vast majority of that map is blue. Because they were classed as developing countries, they weren't given targets. Okay, so all of the blue countries, which is a very large chunk of that map, they have no targets at all. Then if you look at the orange and the yellow and the purple, they either signed up and pulled out, which is the United States, or they gave up on it, Canada, or they pulled out. Yeah. So anything that's those other colours is like, oh, well, they didn't really do much. Green is good. Okay, so green were the countries that kind of stuck to it and achieved something. And we largely big up Europe. So these are the percentages by which they reduced their greenhouse gas emissions over the lifetime of the Kyoto Protocol. Pretty good. All right, pretty good. So Europe is seen to be the kind of the winning continent under Kyoto. And I think what you need, when you're making a decision about how effective Kyoto is, as I said, it is easier with the benefit of hindsight. I think and this is just my personal opinion, I think it's better that some countries achieved something rather than nobody did anything at all. So that's my take on it. But globally, over the lifetime of the Kyoto Protocol, greenhouse gas emissions increased. So what some people, and I do get their point of view, would argue is, what's the point? Why should some countries try if other countries can't be bothered and they're not even taking action? I don't know. I think it's better that some countries tried, but that's maybe the optimist in me. Okay, and the way that the EU did it is essentially they turned carbon into money. So carbon emissions became traded. So you would have an amount of carbon that you were allowed to emit. If you went over that, you had to buy carbon credits from somebody else, so you had to pay money. If you emitted under your limit, you could sell your carbon credits and get money, and it worked, and it was brilliant. But as I said, CO2 did increase. However, let me please, Copenhagen was the meeting to try and replace Kyoto, okay? And this is the real document, okay? It's a draft version, but this is a real document. And it says lovely, lovely things, right? We underline that climate change is one of the greatest challenges of our time. We agree that deep cuts in global emissions are required according to science, right? Great. And I'm going to scroll, sorry if it makes your eyes go funny. That's who signed up, and that's what they agreed. All right? Nothing. It all got bound up in geopolitics and I'm not doing it if they're not doing it and all of that. And do you see, if you now look back at Kyoto, you're like, oh, okay, maybe Kyoto achieved more than I realised. So that was that. Paris was widely agreed to be quite a significant turning point because of a little important thing called Barack Obama. So Barack Obama managed to get more countries on side because what everyone had been fed up with is under Kyoto, the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide at the time, the United States, wasn't doing it. They're a more developed country with money and power and technology, and they weren't doing anything. And that is widely regarded to be why Copenhagen went wrong, because everyone was really frustrated with the United States. Barack Obama, in his own inimitable way, managed to persuade everyone to get back on board for Paris. And that is seen as quite a big turning point. It's where keep 1.5 alive comes from. So 1.5 and 2 degrees are widely regarded to be kind of milestones and tipping points and thresholds and all of those things. So that's where they come from. And now, so although we have, well, I'm speaking to you currently in summer 2024, so I don't know what's going to be next. Currently, Joe Biden kind of has got the US signed up to Action on Climate Change and United Nations agreements. Who will be next and what they will do, we don't know. But it would appear that global agreements on climate change are massively influenced by who is in power in America, because Bill Clinton signed the US up to Kyoto and then Bush pulled them out, and then Barack Obama. So it's a bit like the hokey cokey, really, the hokey cokey of the US and climate change. I should just add, that recent, so that's where I meant to be, post Paris climate change agreements, for example, Glasgow, everyone says good stuff, okay, really good stuff. And one thing that is changing, which is scary and yet brilliant at the same time, is the cost of inaction is becoming greater than the cost of action. I.e., one of the things that has put countries off tackling climate change has been the cost of doing so. But now that the weather's becoming more extreme and sea levels are rising and there is increased problems with wildfires and all of that stuff, that's beginning to cost money. And so countries are beginning to realise that the cost of tackling climate change actually is probably a good decision in the long run financially. So that's good. But we'll just have to keep updated with all of that. One of the problems, I think, with the international responses to climate change is the nature of short-term politics. Politicians are looking to get voted in for 4 to 5 years, usually. You don't want to be the politician who makes the hard-hitting decisions that are required to really affect fossil fuel emissions. So we will always have this issue between short-term politics and long-term sustainability, and I don't know how you make that go away. We'll always have the geopolitics of, well, I'm not doing it if they're not doing it, and why should we do it? I mean, I think it's a fairly valid argument for less developed countries to say, well, hang on a minute, the way that you developed your economy was basically to trash the environment and produce lots and lots of greenhouse gases. Just because we now know that that's bad for the planet shouldn't really mean that we can't develop. And I find that a really hard argument to counter. I'm really hoping that we can find sustainable ways of development for these countries, but that's tricky. So it's tricky, and that's why I think national is probably more important. Again, this is just my personal opinion. You do not have to agree with me. I wish we had an effective international policy, but I just feel like it's too bogged down in all of those things. Individual countries actually are doing quite a lot. There's quite a lot of good news stories. So the UK is heavily pursuing renewables. We're really trying to change our energy mix to make it less reliant. I mean, look at how much less coal we now use. That's brilliant. Coal is like the dirtiest of the fossil fuels for acid rain, greenhouse gases. I mean, it really is. And look, we've made a huge transformation. We're trying to increase our nuclear output. We've got Hinkley Point just up the road is what I was trying to say. And of course, we're building lots and lots of renewables. So we're trying, I think, in the UK. There is Hinkley being I can't talk, can I? Hinkley being built. Solar farms, lots and lots of things going on all over the UK to try and produce our electricity in different ways, which is fab. We're trying to get people to see energy as money, so smart meters and energy efficiency ratings. So even if you don't care about climate change, and there are of course people who don't, people care about money. They will try and save money. And increasingly, I think the British government is trying to get us all to think of energy as money and to use less of it, which is great. Electric cars, controversial for lots of reasons. But in terms of climate change, you could argue, obviously, the lack of emissions at the point of use. I am not, in this video, going to get into the whole battery production and all of that, but it's a valid argument, entirely valid argument. I'm just not going to get to it here. Iceland, however, are doing some really cool stuff, as they often do. So Orca is a carbon capture and storage, CCS, facility. So what Iceland have realised is that they can actually take CO2 out of the atmosphere and turn it into a solid, which they then bury deep underground, which is pretty impressive stuff. Now, the reason that it has to be Iceland, you may or may not know this, Iceland is able to produce all of its electricity using renewable energy because of geothermal power and hydroelectric power. Therefore, the energy that is required to capture the carbon, solidify it and bury it is not adding to climate change. Because if you were going to run this, but you were going to burn oil or gas to power it, you are slightly shooting yourself in the foot, aren't you? So it's really important that this is run by renewable electricity. But have a look at Orca. It is pretty cool. Basically, I'm only going to talk to you about those two, but there are lots of countries around the world who have sort of taken it upon themselves to try and take action. And I see some real signs of positives there. And then, of course, there's us. You know, you-ish. You, your family, your friends, villages, towns. We've got people at smaller scales increasingly trying to do their bit. And it's just worth reminding you of the whole bottom-up, top-down idea. Anything that's done by a large organisation or the government or a council or whatever is, of course, a top-down approach. But there are an increasing number of bottom-up approaches. Greta Thunberg is an example of a bottom-up approach. You know, she was one schoolgirl, she went on strike, and she's kind of led a whole movement. That's a bottom-up approach. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but if you do something at home or if you do something at work that is all about trying to reduce, reuse, recycle, reduce use of energy, anything like that, it counts, okay? It all counts. So, which is most effective? Well, that's kind of a decision for you, isn't it? I would say it should be the international, but as with everything we said in the global governance module last year, the trouble with that is the politics and the not really getting anywhere. Have meetings, chat about stuff. Do you really achieve anything? No. So my personal opinion is I think the national and local responses are more powerful. Right, adaptation. There's a certain amount of climate change that's going to happen. We've got to learn to live with it. Ta-da! Floating houses in Holland. How cool are they? Holland is really vulnerable to sea level rise. It's a very, very low-lying country. That's one of the things that they are doing to adapt. We've got the Thames Barrier, which you learned about in the coasts module, and they have plans to kind of strengthen and raise this to try and continue to protect London from sea level rise in the medium term. And there's a few other ideas. All right, so it's just about learning to live with the amount of climate change that has already happened. Right, Finally, this is not on the syllabus. You do not need to take notes. I said right at the beginning of the video that there's going to be a plea. When I'm dead and gone, which I hope is no time soon, but when I am, I just need you all to just remember that Nikki says, just question anything that they suggest that is geoengineering or climate engineering. Humans love to develop solutions to problems, and that's fantastic, and it should be admired. I wholeheartedly agree with that. But I'm not sure that engineering the climate is very sensible. One of the things you probably have realised from the weather and climate module is that the atmosphere is really quite a complicated thing, and there are all types of feedback that we don't fully understand, and there's lots of things that we could get wrong. I don't think that messing around with that is the right approach. These are just 3 things that humans have suggested we could do to tackle climate change and continue to live the way we do. So the top left is mirrors. Put some mirrors between us and the sun, reflect the sunlight back out to space. Bottom one is let's fake volcanic eruptions. So volcanic eruptions that produce ash clouds can block out sunlight. Why don't we fake that with big balloons up in the stratosphere and create artificial clouds that will reflect sunlight back to space? Or the picture on the right hand side is it's almost like a Roomba, which are those kind of robotic vacuum cleaners. This is unmanned, it patrols the seas and it uses seawater to produce clouds. Now, clouds are very good at reflecting sunlight back out to space, but I'm not going to insult your intelligence by telling you what else they do. I'm not sure that any of those is going to end particularly well. So if I'm not around to protest and to kind of go, excuse me, I'm not sure that's a particularly good idea, if some of you possibly could on my behalf, I would be enormously grateful. Right, on that note, thank you very much.